All right, welcome to this explainer on the cognitive depth of phone call anxiety. Today, we're going to unpack a really common modern phenomenon that so many of us experience, but very few of us actually understand. We are going to decode the hidden psychological reality behind why we absolutely despise talking on the phone. So if you've ever felt guilty for sending a call straight to voicemail, you're definitely going to want to pay close attention to this, because the science behind your reaction, it's honestly fascinating.
Okay, picture this. You're sitting there, perfectly relaxed. Or maybe you're just deeply focused on a project, and suddenly, boom, your phone lights up and starts vibrating across the desk. Does your heart just instantly drop? Even if you glance over and see it's just your best friend or a family member calling, you probably know that exact feeling. You stare at the screen, completely frozen. You're not reaching to answer it. Nope. Instead, you're literally just holding your breath, waiting for it to finally roll over to voicemail so you can just let out a sigh of relief, right? And then you text them back 5 minutes later like, oh, hey, just saw this. It's this visceral dread, a literal freeze response. But why exactly does this happen?
Well, for years, society has been super quick to slap a pretty negative label on this exact behavior. If you ignore a call, people are going to tell you that you're being antisocial or rude, or maybe even that you're dealing with severe social anxiety. But it turns out, psychology reveals a totally different story. And honestly, the truth is incredibly validating. Hating phone calls isn't a character flaw. Actually, scratch that, it's the exact opposite. It points directly to your cognitive depth. It's actually a massive sign of a highly reflective, advanced way that your brain processes social information. It's really not about avoiding people at all. It's just about how your mind works. So let's dive into the actual mechanics of how we communicate. To understand the why here, we first have to look at how your brain naturally responds to conversations. When someone texts you, you have a really distinct advantage: the luxury of time. You can read it, put the phone down, chew on what you want to say, and then respond whenever you're good and ready. But phone calls, they completely strip that luxury away. They demand an immediate, real-time, forced response. So you end up with this massive friction between the safety and control of a text message and the instant, completely unpredictable reaction that a live call demands.
And that brings us to a really fascinating concept: cognitive inhibition. This is basically the rare ability to pause, evaluate the consequences of what you might say, and then choose a deliberate, logical response rather than just blurting out the very first automatic reaction that pops into your head. Your brain essentially builds this little mental gap to protect you and make sure your communication is high quality. Well, a sudden phone call completely obliterates that necessary mental gap. You don't hate the person calling you. You just hate that the format of a live phone call forces you to react instantly, totally bypassing your brain's healthy, natural preference to think carefully before speaking.
Now, what's really cool is how this highlights two totally different ways our brains operate. Your average person kind of just navigates the world operating smoothly on fast automatic reactions. They can banter back and forth on a call without missing a beat. But the reflective brain operates completely differently. It strongly prefers slow, analytical thinking. So when your phone rings out of nowhere, it's actually an aggressive interruption. It forcefully drags your highly active brain out of its comfortable, deep-thinking state and drops it into a stressful, surface-level mode where, frankly, it just doesn't perform as well. In psychology, this specific wiring is known as System 2 dominance. If you have this trait, your brain simply prefers slow, deliberate, analytical thinking. Period. It's not a glitch in your system, it's a feature. Your brain just functions at its absolute best when it can process information at its own pace. An unpredictable dialogue completely disrupts that optimal pace. So, if you've been carrying around guilt for not answering the phone, let this validate you right now. Your brain is literally just trying to stay in the lane where it operates most effectively.
Experts often call this avoidance a preference for asynchronous communication, which, is really just a fancy way of saying you prefer interacting at a delayed pace, like texting or sending an email. It gives you the time you need to formulate thoughtful responses that actually have depth and intention. And I really want to reassure you here. Declining a call doesn't mean you don't care about the person on the other end of the line. Not at all. It just means you naturally prefer asynchronous communication because it perfectly aligns with your psychological strengths.
But wait, there's another crucial piece to this puzzle. We also have to consider exactly how much mental energy you use to process social cues. Think about a normal in-person conversation for a second. When you talk to someone face-to-face, you're constantly gathering data, right? You're reading their body language, you're watching their facial expressions, you're picking up on tiny micro-behaviors. And all of this helps you understand the true context of what they're saying. But on a phone call, all of that social data is completely missing. You are essentially flying blind. An enormous amount of context that your brain usually relies heavily on is just totally gone. And because you likely possess high sensory processing sensitivity, the absence of all that visual data is a huge problem. Your brain doesn't just casually ignore the missing information. It frantically tries to compensate for it. It literally starts working overtime. You suddenly find yourself analyzing every tiny little shift in their tone of voice. You're dissecting slight hesitations and agonizing over those awkward silences, all just to figure out what they're really thinking. Your mind hyper-focuses on auditory clues to try and fill in the massive gaps left by that missing visual data.
And as you can probably guess, that entire mental gymnastics routine leads directly to what's known as cognitive overload. We're not talking about just being mildly annoyed by a chat. This is literal physical exhaustion. A phone call physically drains you because your brain is burning a tremendous amount of biological energy trying to process a highly complex social interaction while half of the normal human data is missing. It's a massive energy drain. So when you feel totally wiped out after just a 10-minute call, it is not in your head. It is a real, measurable biological response to overload.
Let's just take a breath here and really think about this for a second. Because you process the world so intensely, and because you naturally notice absolutely everything around you, a sudden interruption, like the loud, demanding ring of a phone, shatters your complex thought processes. It completely overwhelms your processing depth. Your mind is already doing heavy lifting behind the scenes, and an uninvited call is basically like someone unexpectedly dropping an extra set of weights right onto your shoulders.
Because of all that heavy lifting, your mind simply demands what psychologists call cognitive quiet. After all that intense processing, your brain requires this powerful mental recovery state where your nervous system can finally just calm down and reset. Now, you might view your time alone as simply needing a break, but we really need to reframe that. Your alone time isn't you hiding from the world. For an intense, highly reflective mind, cognitive quiet is a mandatory biological necessity. It's literally the only way you recharge.
So, a sudden phone call is an uninvited demand on that highly valuable mental space. When you stare at that ringing screen and ultimately decide to decline the call, you are actually protecting your boundaries. You subconsciously realize this profound truth. Protecting your peace and emotional balance is vastly more important than being constantly accessible to everyone else's schedule. Letting a call go to voicemail isn't a failure at all. It's a subconscious, deeply healthy assertion of your own boundaries.
So what does this supposed flaw actually tell us about you? Well, it reveals some immense cognitive strengths. Your mind avoids phone calls because it prioritizes high-quality processing. Your brain values deep reflection. It values emotional control over knee-jerk reactions. And above all, it values intentional communication. You want your words to actually matter, and you want the space to ensure that they do.
So, look, the next time your phone rings and you feel that familiar wave of dread, try not to let the societal guilt creep in. You are not broken, and you absolutely aren't antisocial. You simply have a mind that values intentional communication over rushed noise.
Now that you understand the true cognitive depth behind your phone anxiety, now that you are scientifically validated and hopefully deeply understood, the whole question shifts. You weren't flawed, you are highly reflective. So how will you use your unique cognitive wiring as your greatest strength today? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and remember, your mind's natural pace is something to be protected, not corrected.